Okay, ready to dive into something pretty cool.
Always.
So we're looking at this plan from South Africa, right? For their Northern Cape province.
Right.
It's huge, like seriously massive, bigger than a whole bunch of European countries put together.
And hardly anyone lives there.
Yeah, tons of space to grow.
Yeah.
You sent over this document, the Northern Cape's Provincial Spatial Development Framework,
Mm?
the PSDF,
Right.
right?
It's their big plan for the future.
It's their roadmap.
Yeah.
So before we get into the nitty-gritty,
Sure.
can we talk about the why? Like, why even have this PSDF thing? What's the point?
Well, think of it like this. The Northern Cape has so much potential, but it needs a way to coordinate all its development efforts. Like a symphony orchestra. You have all these talented musicians, right?
Right.
But without a conductor.
Could be a mess.
Exactly. Total
Okay.
chaos. The PSDF is like that conductor, making sure everyone is playing in harmony.
Got it. So it's about creating a unified vision for the whole province.
Yes. And here's where it gets even more interesting. The PSDF isn't just some standalone thing.
Oh.
It's directly connected to South Africa's national development goals. It flows from their national development plan, then down to the National Spatial Development Framework.
And finally, to the provinces and even local communities.
Exactly. It's all linked, all working together to achieve these big, overarching goals.
Okay, so we've got this master plan for the Northern Cape, and it's all in sync with the national vision.
Right.
But what's it actually aiming for? Like, what are the specific goals?
Well, they've identified 4 main drivers. It's like a compass pointing them in the right direction.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Yeah.
What's the first direction?
Economic growth, development, and prosperity. They really want to maximize the province's potential, especially in areas like agriculture, mining, renewable energy.
Makes sense. The Northern Cape has a ton of natural resources.
It does, but it's not just about extracting those resources. They also want to do it responsibly.
So what does that look like?
Well, for agriculture, they're looking at optimizing water use, promoting drought-resistant crops. In mining, it's about responsible practices and making sure local communities benefit. And get this, they even want to turn the Northern Cape into a renewable energy powerhouse.
Wow, harnessing all that sun and wind. So they're really emphasizing sustainable development.
Absolutely, it's one of their core principles. And that leads us to the second driver, which is all about social equity and human welfare.
Right, because economic growth doesn't mean much if it doesn't benefit everyone.
Exactly. They're trying to tackle those deep-rooted spatial inequalities that have been a problem in South Africa for a long time.
So it's about making sure everyone has equal access to opportunities.
Exactly. Equal access to education, healthcare, housing, basic services, no matter who you are or where you live. That's the vision.
Okay, so we've got economic growth that's both sustainable and equitable. Sounds pretty good so far.
It does, but we can't forget about the environment, right? Especially in a region as fragile as the Northern Cape.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. How do they balance all this development with protecting the natural world?
Well, that's where the third driver comes in, environmental sustainability and resilience.
And I'm guessing that's a big challenge in such an arid landscape.
It is. Climate change and water scarcity are huge issues there.
Right.
So the PSDF emphasizes things like climate change adaptation, protecting those unique ecosystems like the Karoo.
Oh yeah, the Karoo's amazing.
It is. And they're also working to manage those potential conflicts that can happen between, say, agriculture and mining.
So they're really baking sustainability into every aspect of the plan.
They are. But here's the thing, none of it works without the fourth driver, accountable and effective governance.
Oh, right. You can have the best plan in the world, but if you can't implement it.
Exactly. It's all about making sure the planning process is transparent and inclusive, and that everyone involved, from the national government down to local municipalities, knows their roles and responsibilities.
Because execution is everything.
It is, and that's something we'll be digging into even more as we continue our deep dive into the PSDF.
Awesome. I'm really starting to see how much thought and care they've put into this plan.
It's impressive.
It really is.
You know, it's not just high-level goals. This PSDF actually gets into the details of how they're going to do all this.
Yeah. There's a whole section on how they're actually planning things out.
Spatial planning.
Yeah, that.
Yeah.
And I gotta admit, some of it was kind of over my head. Like how they're organizing development on the ground.
Well, it's a big province. It's complex, but they have this interesting approach. Spatial action areas.
The SAAs.
Yeah.
Right, those. So remind me again, what are those all about?
Okay, think of a puzzle, right? But instead of one big picture, you've got separate sections.
Okay.
Each one has its own unique patterns. That's kind of what they're doing with the Northern Cape, dividing it up.
into these zones. Each one is a PSAA.
Exactly. So they can tailor their development strategies.
So they're not trying to use the same approach everywhere.
Right, because a one-size-fits-all approach wouldn't work. The Northern Cape is too diverse.
So give me an example. How do these PSAAs actually work?
Okay, so you've got the Coastal Spatial Action Area, the CSAA.
Uh-huh.
That one's all about the coast. Sustainable fishing, tourism, maybe even ocean energy.
Right.
But then you have something like the Gamagara Spatial Action Area, the GSAA, that's inland, all about mining.
Makes sense.
They've got a rich mining history there, but they also want to diversify the economy.
So each PSAA is like a mini development plan, customized to a specific region.
That's a great way to think about it. And it's not just economic potential they're looking at. Each PSAA factors in environmental stuff, social equity.
To make sure development is balanced and
Right.
benefits everyone.
Exactly.
Okay, so they've got the province divided up into these zones,
Right.
but how do they manage what happens within each zone? I saw something about spatial planning categories.
Spatial planning categories, or SPCs.
Yeah, SPCs. What are those?
Well, sounds kind of technical.
It does.
But it's actually pretty simple. It's like a set of guidelines for how they should use the land in different areas.
Like zoning.
Kind of like zoning, but on a much bigger scale.
Yeah.
And it's not about saying you can build this here, but not that there. It's more about giving a framework for making smart decisions.
Smart and sustainable.
Exactly. So development happens in the right places, and they protect those sensitive ecosystems.
You give me an example.
Sure. Take the Karoo. That's a biodiversity hotspot. So they'd use, let's say, SPCA to designate some core conservation areas.
Like national parks.
Hmm.
Places where you don't really want any development.
Exactly. To preserve what makes the Karoo special.
Yeah.
Then, around those core areas,
You'd have what? Buffer zones?
yeah, designated as SPCB, where development is allowed but carefully controlled.
To minimize any impact.
Right. Then maybe you've got SPCC for agriculture, those prime areas, especially along rivers.
Like the Orange River.
Yeah, the Orange and the Vaal. They want to protect those for food security, make sure there's enough farmland for the future.
Makes sense. So each piece of land has a purpose, and there are guidelines for how to use it.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
And it's all about creating a province that's both economically successful and environmentally sustainable.
So far, so good. But I keep wondering, how do they actually make all this happen? This PSDF is ambitious.
It is ambitious, and implementing it is a big challenge.
Yeah. I mean, who's responsible for all this? How does it work in practice?
Well, remember that collaborative governance structure we talked about earlier? That's key here.
The one where everyone works together?
Right. Think of it like a dance, lots of partners moving together.
Okay.
So the national government sets the stage, providing the big policy direction, the legal framework. Then the provincial government steps in, leading the dance,
Okay.
They're the ones who developed and are implementing the PSDF. But it doesn't stop there.
The local municipalities have a role to play too, right?
Exactly. They have to adapt the PSDF to their specific areas, make sure it works on the ground. It's about everyone working towards the same goals, but with enough flexibility to adjust to local needs.
So it's not just a top-down approach.
No, and that's what's so cool about this. They've built in all these ways for people to talk to each other and work together.
Like what?
They have these intergovernmental relations forums where different levels of government can come together, share ideas, figure out problems.
Make sure everyone is on the same page.
Right. And it goes beyond just government. They're also working with private businesses, community groups, and even just regular citizens.
So it's a really inclusive process.
It is, because transforming a whole province, especially one as big and diverse as the Northern Cape, takes everyone working together.
I can see how powerful that collaborative approach could be, but it must also be tricky to manage.
Oh, it's definitely complex. Lots of moving parts. There's always the risk of things getting lost in translation.
Or people having different priorities.
Exactly. Or just bureaucratic stuff getting in the way. But they seem to be aware of these challenges. They really emphasize building good relationships, open communication, making sure everyone trusts each other.
So it's not just about structures and systems, it's also about human connections, making sure everyone understands the vision.
Absolutely. Sustainable development is about people as much as it is about plans.
So how do they know if it's working? How do they measure their progress? This plan is huge.
Well, they have a system for monitoring and evaluation. They track their progress, see what's working, what's not, and make changes along the way.
So it's not a static thing, it's constantly evolving.
Exactly. Because the world is always changing, right? The Northern Cape is changing too. New challenges, new opportunities.
The PSDF has to adapt.
It does. They've built in this system of continuous learning and improvement. Like, they're setting a course, but they're also constantly checking the compass and making adjustments.
That's smart.
It is. Because you need to be both ambitious and adaptable when you're dealing with something as complex as sustainable development.
You know, going through this PSDF, it feels like a story, you know?
Yeah.
Like a story of transformation, not just for the Northern Cape,
Yeah.
for how we think about development everywhere.
I see that. It's like moving away from those short-term wins
Right.
towards something that lasts.
Sustainable.
Yeah. And it's not just top-down anymore.
It's everyone working
The
together.
partnerships.
And it's not just about economic growth or social equity or the environment,
It's all those things woven together.
like threads in a tapestry.
Yeah, exactly. They're creating a whole new way of thinking about progress.
One that's more inclusive, more balanced.
More resilient, too.
And the coolest thing is, it's not just talk. They're actually doing it.
They are. There are all these renewable energy projects popping up. Agriculture is becoming more climate smart. New stuff happening in tourism and manufacturing.
I'm really curious, what do you think the Northern Cape will look like in, say, 20 years, if they keep this up?
Oh, man. It's hard to say exactly, but it has the potential to be a model for other regions. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
This is a province with a ton of natural resources. They could have just gone for the easy money.
Just exploited what they had,
Exactly. But they chose a different path, a harder path.
but one that will pay off in the long run.
Right. It's like they're saying, we're not just going to manage what we have, we're going to create the future we want.
I love that. That's so powerful.
It is. This PSDF is like a declaration. They're committed to a future where everyone benefits, where the economy is strong, but so is social justice and the environment.
I think the thing that stands out most to me is the focus on collaboration.
Yeah?
It's not just a government plan, it's everyone's plan.
Bringing together all these different people, government folks, business leaders, community organizers, regular people.
Everyone has a stake in it.
And that's a lesson for everyone, everywhere, really. We've got some big problems in the world.
Climate change, inequality,
Yeah.
not enough resources to go around.
Right. And it's easy to feel overwhelmed. Like, what can we even do about all this?
Right. What paths do we take?
But then you see a place like the Northern Cape,
Doing things differently.
and it gives you hope. Like, hey, we're not powerless. We can create a better future.
If we're clear about what we want,
Yeah,
and if we work together,
exactly.
I'm cautiously optimistic. Cautious, because it won't be easy,
No,
but optimistic because I've seen what's possible when people work together.
I feel the same way. The Northern Cape's journey is just starting, but I think their story can inspire a lot of people to think differently, to be bold.
To never give up.
Right.
And for anyone listening, if you're intrigued, go check out the full PSDF document. It's full of interesting stuff.
Yeah.
And who knows, maybe it'll spark some ideas for you too, for how you can make a difference in your own community.